They called us fragile, flesh and bone, a flicker against the endless void. To the galaxy's empires, we were an afterthought, primitive, divided, forgettable. But prey is only weak until the hunt begins. The first time alien soldiers set foot on human soil, they expected surrender. They expected fear. What they found was something they could not name. Men and women with nothing left but fire in their eyes. Cities burning, skies torn open, yet still we stood. We had no fleets vast enough, no weapons polished by centuries of conquest. What we had was something far older, far sharper. The will to fight when fighting meant certain death. The fury of a species that refuses to be broken. And as the alien legions marched, they began to whisper among themselves. Whispers of battles that should have been easy, turning into nightmares. Whispers of humans who would not die quietly. Whispers of a war that shook even the conquerors. Because in the end, it was never about strength. It was about defiance. And now across the stars, a single question lingers. If this is what humanity does when cornered, what happens when we rise to lead? The sky opened without warning. At first it was a stitch of light, a needle in the black. Then the needle became a blade. Silent at first, no thunder, no flash. Just a ripple in the stars that moved with impossible intent. The first orbital platforms vanished like candles snuffed. City grids went dark. Satellites dropped from their orbits as if unseen hands had cut their strings. The alien ships were not graceful. They were geometries that did not belong to human sight. Angles that glowed cold. Surfaces that drank light. Weapons folded space into knives. Where they aimed, matter did not simply burn, it unmade. Steel turned glass bright and evaporated, whole neighborhoods collapsing into air. Panic followed the physics. The world's navies, patched up carriers, half-repaired corvettes, rusty freighters, scrambled. They fired. They blazed. Beams lanced into alien shields and were absorbed like raindrops into stone. Entire squadrons blinked out before they could call their names. On the decks of the shipyards where Daniel worked, old men who had once joked about war found themselves throwing wrenches like shovels into a grave. Children who had known nothing but school alarms now knew what sirens meant. Fear was a slow animal. It crept. It devoured indecision. People hid in basements, in subway tunnels turned into sanctuaries, in churches and factories. They prayed. They cursed. They watched the news feeds that were strips of broken data, faces frozen in the moment before everything changed. And then the cruelty showed its face. The aliens did not only strike ships and towers, they struck mercy. Rescue convoys were snapped in half. Hospitals that tried to evacuate became targets. The message clear and terrible: resist and suffer. The cold arrogance of conquest. Whole colonies beyond Mars collapsed into silence. No explosion, just the quiet of places erased. The horror made anger bloom like a bitter flower. Anger changed people. It was the necessary metabolism between fear and action. Where fear narrowed, anger opened. Sharp, precise. Victims learned to fight back in small, lethal ways. A mining crew on Ceres taught themselves to time the stun pulses in the enemy drones. Sweep. Mechanics like Daniel discovered that old signal jammers, designed years ago for pirate skiffs, scrambled. The alien targeting, long enough for a convoy to slip away. Mara, who had once sketched constellations, walked into a commandeered comms van and refused to leave. She learned to reroute civilian broadcasts into decoy flares, turning lullabies into false positions that drew enemy eyes away from fleeing ships. Those improvisations became tactics. They were not elegant. They were desperate. Freighters were stripped down and loaded with whatever could become momentum. Rails, ore, fuel, then sent on one way. Flights to smash into the alien scouts that hovered in low orbit. Old orbital mines, abandoned and forgotten, were retrofitted to act as tripwires. Street gangs with nothing left became precision saboteurs. Schools became armories. Bakeries became signal kitchens for coded messages. Humanity turned temples of routine into engines of war. One success made another possible. An improvised EMP, born from a salvage team's experiment, fried a cluster of alien sensors over a port. For 38 breathless minutes, a corridor opened. Ships that should have died made it out. The port lit up with horns and tears and laughter so loud it almost sounded like victory. On the bridge of a refugee freighter, Daniel let himself believe in that sound. For a moment he thought maybe the sky would spare them. Then the mothership answered. The enemy's counterstrike was not a salvo. It was a judgment. Gravity wells bent the tide of sea and air. throwing ships like pebbles. Massive tendrils of engineered cold swept through the atmosphere, freezing engines and the marrow of metal alike. Entire districts became tombs of glass. The mothership's voice, if such a thing, could be called a voice, broadcast over the networks as a flat, translated phrase: submit, stand down, cease. The broadcast was not a negotiation. It was an invitation to humiliation. Humanity answered with a different language. They answered with fury. Small fleets, patched, bleeding, proud, formed lines of sacrificial steel. They did not expect to win. They expected to make the enemy pay in time. They rammed. They detonated. They blinded sensors with reflective swarms. They fed the alien logic a maze it could not complete. Civilians hiding inside wreckage. Children used as human shields in a way that made the invaders recoil, if aliens could recoil. The cost was measured in names. Friends gone, neighbors gone. The price became incalculable. Mara watched a convoy collapse in a flare of silver. Light and saw a boy she had taught to whistle taken. She learned what anger wanted. Retribution. Not revenge, something sterile and necessary. Daniel watched the shipyards burn, saw cranes fall like wounded beasts, and felt a feral, clear decision settle in his chest. He would not only mend engines anymore. He would make them mean something beyond transport. And somewhere in the quiet of a commandeered lecture hall, a ragged council of survivors huddled and made a plan that was ridiculous in scale, ingenious in its simplicity. There were no generals left who possessed real armies. There were engineers, farmers, ex-prisoners, and mothers who had learned to aim. They pooled the worst they had: broken satellites, mining lasers, old reactor cores, the battered hull of an ancient battleship that had been nothing but museum. Metal, until the day metal became a promise. The fleet that rose from Earth's broken shipyards was not beautiful. It was a patchwork of scars and desperation. Hulls pockmarked with meteor dents, scavenged plates welded at odd angles, engines that coughed more than roared. Every vessel bore the fingerprint of hands that refused to give up. Some were civilian freighters stripped to their bones. Others museum relics dragged into war. But together they became something more than machines. They became a statement. The alien mothership loomed in orbit, a horizon of cold metal and impossible geometry. Its weapons glittered with the same casual power that had erased entire cities. Against it, humanity's flotilla looked laughable, children with slingshots facing a storm. And yet they launched. Daniel stood on the bridge of the refitted battleship, vigilant. The ship groaned like an old warrior dragged out of bed. But every console hummed alive. Around him, mechanics, students, and retired sailors manned stations they had learned only days before. Fear ran through the room like current, but fear was not weakness anymore. It was fuel. "Target acquired!" Mara's voice cracked over the comms. She had refused to stay behind. She guided the jammers and decoys from the ground, her hands flying across battered keyboards. "They're locking on you already. You don't have long." Daniel exhaled. Good. The first volley came like thunder. Alien lances carved through space, melting steel like wax. 3 human ships disappeared in seconds, their names forever frozen on the manifest. The fleet didn't falter. They surged forward. Old freighters on suicide runs rammed escorts. Detonating cargo holds full of volatile ore. Mining lasers, never meant for war, cut across alien hulls, forcing shields to flare and stutter. Civilian shuttles released swarms of reflective shards, confusing enemy targeting arrays. Every trick, every scrap of ingenuity was thrown into the fire. Still, the mothership advanced. Its main weapon unfurled, a lattice of burning light stretching across half the sky. Where it pointed, space itself seemed to fold inward. The earth below felt the pull. Tides rose unnaturally, storms cracked the atmosphere. This was not war. This was extermination. On Vigilance Bridge, silence held for a heartbeat. The crew saw death coming, and then Daniel's voice cut through, steady and low. "Engage the drive. Take us in." Gasps, shouts. One officer whispered, "That's suicide." "Yes," Daniel answered. "But it's ours." The plan had always been madness. Drive the Vigilant, a relic barely, held together, into the heart of the mothership's weapon array. The ship carried stolen reactor cores rigged to overload. If they reached the target, the blast wouldn't destroy the mothership entirely. But it could cripple its weapon, buy Earth time to breathe. The crew hesitated only a moment. Then one by one voices rang out. I. Fear became unity. Unity became resolve. The final run began. Alien fire hammered the fleet. One by one, human ships died, each death carving a path for the Vigilant. Escorts shielded her with their bodies, breaking apart under withering beams. Freighters detonated in blinding flashes to force open corridors. Overcom's last words were cut short, replaced by static, and still the fleet pressed forward. Mara's voice cracked through again. "You're clear. Daniel, you're clear. It's now or never." The mothership's weapon glowed brighter, gathering power. It aimed, not at Vigilant, but at Earth itself. Daniel looked at the scrap of paper in his pocket. The star in the hand Mara had drawn. He closed his eyes just once. Then he gave the order. "Overload the cores." The ship's alarms wailed. Lights flickered. Heat built, unnatural and rising as the reactors screamed. The Vigilant shuddered under the strain, metal skin peeling as systems collapsed. Still, they flew. Alien interceptors swarmed, tearing into the ship. Hull breaches ripped across decks. Yet the Vigilant did not fall. Every surviving hand clung to controls, cables, weapons, dragging the ship forward through sheer defiance. Closer, closer. The mothership's weapon began to fire, a beam of annihilation swelling at its core. Daniel opened comms to all channels, voice steady, even as fire consumed the bridge. "To every human who can hear this, remember us. Remember that we did not kneel." The Vigilant slammed into the heart of the weapon array, white. The explosion was not fire. It was light and silence, a brilliance that erased shadow for an instant too long to measure. The mothership staggered, its weapons shattered, its shields collapsing in violent ripples. Across the fleet, survivors screamed and wept. Watching the impossible happen, a god brought low by mortals. But the victory was not clean. The blast tore through orbit, scattering debris across the sky. Hundreds more human lives were lost in the shockwave. Communications went silent. Daniel's ship vanished in the brilliance, its crew remembered only in echoes. When the light faded, the mothership still hung in the heavens. Not destroyed, wounded, its weapon gone, but its body unbroken. And yet it retreated. Slowly, silently, the colossal shape turned away, trailing fire and fractured steel. The alien armada followed, limping back into the void. The galaxy had witnessed something it could never unsee. Humanity, against all odds, had made the impossible cost too high. On the ground, Mara stood among the ruins of her command post, headset falling from her hands. She looked to the heavens, where fragments of the Vigilant burned as shooting stars. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "They'll never forget." Above Earth's broken skies, the last image burned into history was not one of surrender. It was the sight of wreckage, glowing like constellations, reminders carved in flame that a small, fragile species had stood against the storm and lived. The battle was over, but silence was not peace. Across Earth, cities lay in ruin, oceans had risen where coasts once thrived, and forests still smoldered under the weight of fire that had fallen from the sky. The air was filled with the sound of rebuilding, hammers, engines, the faint cries of survivors calling for loved ones who would never answer. Humanity had endured, but the cost was etched into every broken skyline. For weeks, there were no stars above at night. Only the drifting remains of ships, human and alien alike, circling the planet like a graveyard. Some fragments still burned, streaking across the heavens as if the universe itself mourned. Children pointed to them as falling stars, whispering wishes into the dark. Adults simply bowed their heads in silence. But even in grief, something had changed. Before the war, Earth had been small, a blue dot hidden at the edge of a vast galaxy that barely knew it existed, fragile, insignificant, a world of dreamers who had never truly believed they would be tested by the abyss. Now that illusion was gone. The galaxy knew Earth's name, not because of wealth or fleets or empires, but because a species too small to matter had made giants bleed. The mothership had retreated, scarred, humbled. Whispers spread through alien channels, across trade routes and hidden courts. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was the spark that could not be extinguished. Mara stood on the shattered remains of what had once been a coastal city. The ocean stretched before her, carrying wreckage out into the horizon. In her hands, she held Daniel's paper scrap, the star and the hand he'd carried into fire. Its edges were burned, its ink smudged, but the symbol remained. She held it high as survivors gathered around her, their faces bruised but unbroken. "This is what they tried to take from us," she said, her voice carrying against the waves. "Not just our lives, Our belief that tomorrow was ours to shape. Daniel and the Vigilant showed them otherwise. They showed us otherwise. Around her, people raised their heads, not cheering. Too much grief lingered for that, but steady, determined. And far above, the galaxy watched. Allies who had once dismissed humanity now rethought their calculations. Rivals who had mocked Earth now spoke of caution. Enemies whispered of vengeance, yes, but also of fear. For in humanity's survival, there was a lesson no empire could ignore, that strength is not measured by size, but by resolve. The scars of war would not fade easily. Generations would carry the memory of burning skies and empty chairs at dinner tables. But woven into that grief was pride, a fierce, unshakable pride that their species had not only survived, but endured against the impossible. Historians would later call it the night of falling stars. Poets would name it the dawn of defiance. For those who lived it, it was simply the moment the galaxy stopped asking if humanity belonged and started asking what would they dare next. Mara looked once more to the heavens. The stars had returned now, faint and trembling beyond the wreckage. She whispered to Daniel, to the crew of the Vigilant, to every name carved into silence, "You've written us into the stars." And in that quiet, as the earth turned beneath a sky forever changed, a truth settled like fire in the hearts of all who remained. Humanity was no longer just surviving. Humanity was inevitable.